My name is Norman Walker. My birth date is November 15, 1938. I was born about a mile from where I'm sitting. My parents were Joe and Irene Walker.
And who were your grandparents?
John Craig, who lived just directly south of here, about 2 miles, and had their own farm.
Tell me about your parents. What were they like when you were growing up as a child? What do you remember about your parents?
Well, my dad was a very hard worker, and of course we built a house here several years ago to kind of help him through some difficult times, and then Dad farmed a lot. He was a farmer, and he also raised 3 houses of chickens. Back then it was small houses. It was 600 chickens per house. And this house that we're living on here is close to 2 of those that used to be there, you know. And I'm having a little trouble getting warmed up to this. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Tell me about whenever you were, you said your dad was a farmer. That was his business. What else did he do? Was that his main business, farming?
Farming was his main business. He did work out some to help with the income. Mom was sick quite a bit, and so a lot of doctor calls, and but Dad hung in there and worked the farm, multiple crops. Also always had a good garden, and the thing that Dad was very good about was handling Mom's illness, which was kind of out of reach of most of us, but Dad was able to handle it very well and keep up the work, and that's something I'll always cherish and remember about him.
You said your dad was a farmer. Tell me about what your part in the family farming business was. What would you do when you were a kid? What do you remember doing to help?
I basically helped Dad a lot in some of the outside chores. Help work in the garden, and also, of course, he was one of the first to get chickens, and so I helped him on those 3 houses of chickens back then to kind of. In fact, I raised 1 house of chickens to help pay my college tuition fees. So it was good. It was hard work, but it was always rewarding work, to be on the farm and do those things.
Besides working with the family business, when you were growing up, what other jobs did you do or chores to make money?
One summer, in fact, it was 2 summers, I worked up at Steel Canning Company in Springdale to help generate some additional income, and then that matriculated into some income that was, helped me, in college as well. So,
tell me more about that job. What did you do? What did you learn from that job?
Well, working at Steel Canning Company was hard work. It had a lot of stacking of goods and line work, but it was interesting work, and I worked with several, good workers that all of us worked together. So,
what kind of, talk about your family around the house. What were some of their routines? What was it like to eat a meal at your house? And what were some of the things that you did at home?
Well, that was one thing, and a way of helping at the house and in some of the chores was, Mom was an excellent cook, and despite some of her illness, she was able to always maintain an early breakfast. Dad always liked an early breakfast working on the farm, and so that's one thing that she handled very well. And sometimes if she was in the hospital, then it was up to Dad and I, and I'd step in and help Dad with any meals and some of the cooking. So back then, that was an interesting capacity to be able to fulfill that, you know, especially with Dad being, you know, working on as hard as he did on the farm.
What about your siblings? What brothers and sisters did you have?
I was the only child. Didn't have any support there, you know, as siblings. But
Tell me about your earliest memories of Tontitown. Coming into town, I mean, back in those days, I assume it was seemed further out to Tontitown than it does now. But what were your earliest memories of Tontitown? What did you do when you went to Tontitown?
my earliest memories of Tontitown was right here on the north side of the highway. Here was a grape vineyard. John Zarden lived there many years, and directly to the east of where we're at right now, Dick Fiore had a grape vineyard. In fact, he had one grape vineyard directly to the east, just past the fence line, and then directly to the south, just past the fence line, was another grape vineyard. And as years went by, there was another grape vineyard directly west of us that Nihai Masani had. And so I was sort of brought up dead center of the grape industry. And Dick Fiore to the east of us was a neighbor that was very well liked, and my dad and him exchanged work a lot to just be able to do the things they needed to accomplish. And of course, working in the grapes was a major thing then. And so I felt very privileged to have grown up this close to the grape industry, and those that was really neighbors in doing that.
Tell me what was involved with raising grapes. What would you and your dad do to help the neighbors raise grapes?
Well, there's a lot of preparation, and you know, the pruning was one of the primary things to accomplish, both after the season, just before fall, and then in the early spring, a lot of caretaking. We have ground plowing and trimming and getting the vineyard ready for the harvest when it come up in August.
You talked about trading. What was that, and how did that work? You said labor trading, I think, or this term.
Oh yeah. Well, you know, in labor trading, it was just more of a co-op. If the neighbor needed something done, it was a courtesy that step in and help the neighbor, whatever it was, and that would reciprocate if needed something done, and it was just an exchange of work that helped move everything along without any additional cash, outlay.
Why was that important? I assume there wasn't a lot of cash on hand those days, and I mean, how did that? Did you actually keep a track of it, or was it pretty informal, or?
It was essentially informal. It was just done when needed, to help the neighbor accomplish what was needed to get it done, and I think that's what being a good neighbor was all about. they've been.
Talk about some of the shops and stores in town that you would go visit in Tontitown. What do you remember as a kid going into town? Where would you shop and what would you do?
There was several stores in Tontitown, and grocery stores were a primary one. And I always remember going into two of those, especially two of those grocery stores, and just a real interesting exchange of hellos and what was going on in the community at the time. And as a boy growing up, that's what I remember most was the trading in those stores.
Who were the owners and what do you remember about them? If you do remember.
I'm going to have to come back to that.
Tontitown has long been known for its delicious Italian food, among other things. And where do you remember as a kid or growing up going to eat? Where would you go and what would you get?
Well, to eat out was just a real treat because we were pretty much home buddies right here, on the farm. But the Venetia Inn, from time to time, would go up there, and that was real close. And it had an early tradition of, spaghetti, which that was the real treat to be able to go up and eat spaghetti in their homemade rolls. So that's the thing that I remember the most about a restaurant, being sort of introduced to the restaurant.
What managers or wait people do you remember from the restaurants, if anybody?
Well, one waitress or owner, especially Alice Letterman, then was just a real jewel. She would come up, we come in the door and just take us and seat us personally, and really, treated us really, really nicely. And I remember that back then as just something really special to be able to do that.
What other businesses or places in town do you remember, if any?
Well, businesses that I was familiar with, again, just comes back this way toward the farm. Dick, our neighbor I mentioned prior, he had a stand, a fruit stand. Everybody called it a wine stand because he did provide a wine mostly from another winery. But why I was so centered with that particular business was Dick also grew apples, and he made apple cider, and then along with the grapes, made grape juice. So I would go down and help him do grape juice and cider, help bottle it. Was one of my primary things I'd done was bottling the, whether it be grape juice or apple cider. And then another treat growing up was he had three girls, Helen, Mary Catherine, and Pauline, and I would sit beside them doing the bottling, and never realized it at the time just really how fortunate I was.
Any other businesses you can think of that you want to mention?
Not right at this time.
Okay. Now tell about where you lived. Have you always lived out here, or did you live other places?
I went in the Air Force in 1958 and 1962 through 1962. And after that, we settled in Fayetteville. And of course, this came about after I was married while in the Air Force to Carol. And so we lived in Fayetteville till just about 20 years ago when we decided to build out here. Like I mentioned earlier, we built here. And so from during that time, we still came out and visited the folks quite frequently. And so essentially I have never really left this area, although I lived in Fayetteville that period of time. We'd come out here to visit the folks and kind of keep up with their health and how things were going with them.
What about school? Where did you go to school, and what was it like?
Well, this is the interesting part of where I went to school. I went to school up in Brush Creek, which is directly northwest of here, just about 4 miles. And I went there through the first 6 grades, and then the system consolidated, and we started going to Springdale. So I went to Springdale, the next 6 grade levels, and graduated in 1957 there at Springdale High.
Who were some of your friends and classmates from this area that you remember?
Friends and classmates that I remember the most was we had neighbors to the west of here, the Lynches, and Ralph Lynch. I went to school with all the times walking. We'd walk together down to Brush Creek early in the morning. And then the other classmate was that I remember very well, in that we started first grade together, and that was Carolyn Page, who lives just directly east of us here. And Carol and I was the only one that went from the Brush Creek that went to all 12 grades together. I went through 6 grades down at Brush Creek, and then graduated at Springdale High in 1957.
What was the school like? How many kids were there, and what was the teacher like, or teachers if you had more than one?
Well, we always had, in way of school teachers, very interesting. Each one was unique in the way they handled classes 1 through 12 under the same roof, same open room policy. How they handled that was just amazing. But Gladys Collins was one that taught several years at Brush Creek. I believe, if I remember, serves me right here, 3 grade levels I went under her, and she was a very disciplinarian school teacher. And you done things right, or you got called in. So Gladys, I kept up with her right until she passed away just a few years ago. She was just an outstanding school teacher.
What about the people in the Tontitown community, the older people, or maybe the most prominent people that you would remember from your younger years? Who were they, and what were they like?
Well, the most prominent way of the Italians, I think I would have to, our neighbor Dick and Florence Ferry was just second to none. We have an outstanding folks to be associated with. And Dick was one of a kind. He could fix anything. Just was a real gentleman in a way of how he handled things. And he taught me a few things just by his work ethics and how he done things. He could fix a radio. He could work on a apple cider barrel. He could do numerous farm chores, and those are the type of people I was closest to, in way of knowing folks, from the Italian community.
You mentioned the Italian community. You were one of the few families here at the time that wasn't part of the Italian community. Is that correct? What was that like, and how were you treated?
Well, it was unique in that the way we were treated was just like Dick Fiore there, that was our neighbor, and him and Dad exchanged work. Knowing him, it was just like knowing a close relative. It was just a fantastic experience to grow up under that atmosphere.
Did your family attend church, and if you did, where did you go?
My grandparents, John and John and Craig, they went to Harmon Methodist, and so as I grew up, Mom was closer to that church and had a tremendous impact on attending Sunday school, as well as during the summer they'd have Bible classes. And so I got to know a lot of folks related to that was close to the Harmon Methodist Church, and we ended up joining that church along with two close friends of mine, Jimmy Lynch and Danny McCamey. And so three of us was joined that church at the same time back then.
When you were a kid growing up in this area, what would you and your friends do for fun?
Well, for fun, after the family or the work chores, getting that done, bicycling was a favorite thing to do. A lot of times we would cycle, and a couple friends that was close, we would, back then, Cowboys and Indians was a favorite pastime to participate in, playing your role, whatever role that you would like to accept as a sort of fantasy. And so my neighbor was a fan of Tom Mix. Back then, Tom Mix was both an actor and just kind of a overall idol. I liked Hopalong Cassidy. Bill Boyd was his official name, but it's something about Hopalong Cassidy, and there was two side guns that I always liked the fantasy. So we'd stretch out our territory, and he'd be Tom Mix and I'd be Hopalong Cassidy, and we accomplished quite a bit doing that.
What about the adults? What would your parents and the neighbors and their friends, what would they get together and do for fun?
Well, parents and neighbors are, close friends a lot of card games back then. The folks would get together and have refreshments and play cards. And that's just a favorite thing they like to do. And a lot of folks would go to the movies, and we'd go. Salem Springs had a movie theater, and we'd go down there from time to time. And then Springdale had 2 movie theaters, and so my first experience in Springdale and going to a movie was the first edition of Gone with the Wind, and that was. I will always remember that movie, just the way it unfolded and what went on. It was certainly, as years went by, became known as one of the all-time greats. But to see it in its first edition was a real treat.
Anything else for fun you can think of for adults or kids?
Well, my aunt, which lived up the road, Roxy Neal, she loved the Grape Festival, and so she was kind of an influence on us to go up. And then, of course, our neighbors, the girls I mentioned, Helen, Mary Catherine, and Pauline, all 3 of them run for Tontitown Queen at one time or the other. So it was always interesting to see the organization behind that and what they'd do to make it a good experience. And it certainly, back then, it wasn't the size that it is now, but to see that unfold and the hard work that was put into it, even though it was smaller, was just a real pleasure to be around.
Tell me about your memories of the first time you went to the Grape Festival. What was it like, and what did you do?
The memories of the Grape Festival was, of course, growing up was basically like a lot of kids like to do, was go to that carnival. And the carnival drew the younger generation, to participate and enjoy. I always had live music, and then various families would work it, whether it be the bingo part of it or some other attraction at the Grape Festival. It was just a real community effort, and the grapes, always got my attention because I'd see those participating to bring their grapes and show them there at the Grape Festival was fascinating to me because I was around the grapes so much here from the house. And Dick Fury, he always had entries, and so that in attending the Grape Festival, that was what, as a boy growing up, fascinated me, was the carnival and the grapes and the music, and I always heard of them having dances in the school basement, but as a boy growing up, you didn't pay too much attention to that. It was the carnival and the kicking around, and enjoying the festival that way was the fun part.
Did you ever have any jobs at the festival or any work at the festival in any way? And if so, what'd you do?
I never did work at the Grape Festival. It's just something that didn't come about during the time I was growing up, from the farm here and the duties, extra duties a lot of times, and just helping Dad out do the farm work. Because, like I say, we had the chickens to take care of, and we had crops. Dad grew a large, a lot of times more than one field of tomatoes, so there's tomatoes to harvest. So it was just a lot of work that went on in keeping the farm up.
Did your family ever work in the festival or do anything to be part of it besides attending?
The only thing in helping at the Grape Festival, and it's mostly in with support, because Dick would be getting his grapes ready, and so Dad a lot of times would help him get the grapes basketed and prepared to take up to the Grape Festival. So outside of that, it was more support, in that way than working directly at the Grape Festival.
Anything else you remember about local traditions besides the Grape Festival that the people have done here in town to celebrate?
I'll have to come back to that. I'm just not.
Let's go back to when you were a kid. Describe what the road was like out front, and what the businesses, storefronts in town. Was it still dirt, or was it a little 2-lane road, or tell me, what was the roads and what was the town like? What did it look like if you went through?
Well, the road out front here, 068, or just a 2-lane road, and my goodness, thinking back to how quiet it was, I think, compared to now, but the road back then was, of course, it was a paved road. 068 was a paved road, but where I'm at right now, going west, 068 ended when they built 412, and the 068 used to curve right back to the right to the north, and so a 2-lane road went through a lot of hilly terrain, curvy terrain. It was just a very dangerous highway. A lot was killed, and this place where I'm living now, it used to be called, and it's still called, Borker's Corner, because we were right in a curve here where we lived, and a number of bad wrecks occurred, and I won't enumerate on the intensity of those wrecks, because some folks died in those wrecks. So it was very unsettling in growing up to see all that happen. And my folks are taking it very well. Mom, even at times, even though she had some illness there, would step right in and help comfort some of those that had bad wrecks. But that is the hard memories, I think, back of 068, and going into town. Certainly, it was a better ride, a better enjoyable experience of driving into Springdale than it is now, because back then it was limited traffic, wasn't it? Intense traffic going down 68, and so we here on this where we live right now, we helped 412 go straight and widen that road to make it a safer road. At the time, it was very pronounced in how much it really did help. Now we're undergoing additional growth problems and growth strains to make that still, and it's developed into a very what I call an unsafe journey, traveling the road.
Talk about how the town has grown from a little bitty town to a pretty good sized town with a lot of businesses and a lot of activity and new houses. What do you remember over the years of how it has changed?
Back when I was growing up, in way of saying the town and area changed, it was very slow change. It was really something new came in. It was a real interesting occurrence. Now we have so much, fast growth going on. It's just nearly mind-boggling about the change that is going on. But back then, you had store changes, store ownerships. It was just very limited, and it didn't have that much in way of additional change going on. That's what I remember, the most about in way of change. It just back then wasn't the pace that it is now in way of the change going on.
If someone asked you, they said, "Where are you from?" and started asking you that, and if they said, "Well, why Tontitown? Why would you pick Tontitown?" What would you tell them?
Why would I pick Tontitown?
Or why have you picked Tontitown, or why to still be here?
I have picked Tontitown just from unique experience of living in an area that you enjoy. I have picked Tontitown from people I know and I feel comfortable with, and growing up here and still living here. Picking Tontitown has not been by essentially choice, because of just being born right within a stone's throw of where I'm sitting. So I have stayed here on purpose because of family ties and just enjoying the fellowship and the neighbors that we share. That's the main thing.
If you had to tell someone who'd never been to Tontitown, and they say, "What is your hometown of Tontitown like?" Someone that didn't know anything about this area, what would you tell them?
I would tell someone that hasn't been here before or is not acquainted with Tontitown that Tontitown is recognized, number one, as a very clean community. Number two, Tontitown has certainly opportunity now, and Tontitown is growing solid. It's growing. I think the city fathers are keeping the best interest of the community at hand and trying their best to withstand the growth that is going on. But for someone new coming, I think and we've had those that pass through and just love it and come back. So it's appealing because it is a safe, clean community.
All right, that kind of restating that theme, if you had to complete this sentence, my favorite thing about Tontitown is, how would you say that sentence?
My favorite thing about Tontitown would be the people. I think it's hard to go beyond without elaborating a lot of those things that you do appreciate. But the people, I think, is the reason I stay here. If we didn't like the people, we certainly wouldn't stay. But my ties and knowing, the sad thing is at my age is seeing people pass on that has been your neighbor and your good friends for a long time. But the folks near you that you've known for a long time, you appreciate what they do and their involvement and their contributions they make to the community. So to me, that's the most important aspect of living here is your neighbor and the good friends that you develop over the years.
What else can you think of maybe that I haven't thought to ask about that would be you want to share? Any stories or any thoughts about the growing up here?
Well, there's several stories, but
Go ahead.
To get the best out of me, I'm at the age where I have to think through things first as to relating it to do it justice. But a number of things is going through my mind right now in a way of various stories that are unique. But something that was real close to me when I was growing up was certainly going to Brush Creek School. And I had a new bicycle. I believe I was in the 5th grade at Brush Creek at the time, and rode the bike down to school that morning, and the road had been just graveled or just graded, and I went off a hill going down to the school, but too fast, and went airborne and knocked myself out on impact. And a neighbor at the bottom of the hill found me and put both me and the bicycle in the truck, taking me back up to the house here. And I woke up coming back, and when I got back to the house, I was feeling okay, but just a little dizzy. And I wrecked the bike and tore my shirt to shreds because I rode in the gravel. And I thought at the time, well, I went down Garrett Hill a bit too fast.
Did you know the guy that picked you up, or was it just somebody good Samaritan, or what?
I knew he was. He lived at the bottom of the Garrett Hill, or it was called, and I didn't know him real well personally. My dad knew him, and so he knew where I lived and got me back up here safely.
Listen, you were going to talk about Welch's. You said you had a memory of that. What did they do here, and how important was Welch's being here?
Well, Welch's was importing to the grape industry here in the area because the Welch's had a plant. Had a plant in Springdale, and so a lot of folks marketed their grapes directly to Welch's for grape juice and various products that Welch's done. Most of them were contracted, and Welch's went through a period of time, and no need to go into detail on their difficulty, but they really dropped the prices of the grapes, and it just almost impossible for the folks those that was raising grapes to make any kind of a profit and come out on it. So a lot of the poultry industry was just starting to take hold on about then, and they decided to start building broiler houses, And so grape vineyards started going out, and that coupled with time, a lot of that's why we not have very many grape vineyards at all now, is because of that. The poultry industry kind of taking hold, and grape vineyards started going out. And some held on to the grape vineyards cutting back. Neighbor here, Dick Fiore, he kept a vineyard and for quite a while, but then others, bigger vineyards especially, was one that's got hit hardest, and they made a decision to either push them out or do both, push them out and build some roller houses.